All right, welcome to the ThinkyHearts webinar. Welcome, welcome everyone. This webinar is titled Energy Efficient Procurement, the Ghana Experience. Can we confirm that you can see my slides, please? Okay, great. Thank you. So who are we at ThinkyHearts? Welcome again to this ThinkyHearts webinar. Who are we at ThinkyHearts? At ThinkyHearts, we are an Africa-rooted initiative that is focused on advancing sustainability, inclusive learning, and circular economy through transformation tools, content, and real-world partnerships. We develop eco-education resources, we lead waste to wealth and green innovation projects. We host webinars like this and learning labs and support change makers across schools, homes, and communities. Our work empowers educators, youth, parents, NGOs, and professionals to turn meaningful ideas into practical impact, from local classrooms to content-wide systems. So we don't just teach sustainability at Thinky Hearts, we live it, we build it, and we share it. You can check our social media pages out. We are at Thinky Hearts on YouTube and Thinky Hearts on LinkedIn. As the session goes on, I'll drop the link to our social media pages so we can have access to it. So during this webinar, I would like us to drop any question we have in the chat box. If you have any question when the speaker is speaking, please drop them in the chat box. We would have a Q&A session will be held after our speaker is done presenting. And please, I would like everyone to stay muted during the talk. Please do not unmute your mic except you raise up your hand and you are permitted to do so. Our guest speaker for today is Hubert Zan. He is an energy transformation expert and assistant manager, energy efficiency regulation at the Energy Commission of Ghana, and will be taking us on our topic today, the energy efficient procurement, the Ghana experience. Good morning, sir. If you can hear me, please, you can go ahead. And can we give a thumbs up or a digital clap to welcome him? Good morning, sir.
Yes, good morning. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Please, I hope you can see my screen.
We can see your screen, sir.
Great. So good morning to everyone, and good morning to ThinkyHearts for this opportunity. As rightly introduced, my name is Hubert Zan, Assistant Manager at the Ghana Energy Commission. And it's a privilege to share what Ghana has been doing as far as energy efficiency is concerned, and then energy efficient procurement. Basically, my presentation will be looking at introducing the concept of energy efficient procurement, policy regulatory frameworks that are in place, capacity building and training that we have undertaken. What are some of the implementation strategies that we have been able to use? And then what are the results of those implementation strategies? Then we talk about some future outlook and incentives that we are introducing. And then we can call it a day by concluding and possibly sharing the Q&A section. So I first start with, and the question that people always ask is, what is energy efficient procurement? Basically, this refers to a strategic acquisition of goods, services, and infrastructure that consumes less energy during life cycle manufacturing, operation, and disposal, as compared to the conventional methods of procurement. This type of procurement usually will focus on life cycle cost analysis rather than upfront costs, performance-based criteria such as using efficiency standards, or in cases where there are energy efficiency ratings, that becomes one of the criteria. It also takes into consideration sustainability and environmental impact as a core evaluation metrics. Now, when it comes to the public sector procurement, there are all kinds of things that go in and considered. Acquisition of goods, services, and works by government or public sector organizations through public contracts are usually what we term as the public sector procurement. And it is always a key economic activity that is undertaken. It also represents more than 12 to 20% of national gross domestic products. Okay, so in some countries, procurement is a key economic activity. In addition to that, developing countries have been found, according to the OECD, to have 30% of its economic activities on procurement. I just mentioned what the public procurement and public sector procurement basically are. So now you look at what is sustainable procurement, and sustainable public procurement takes into account economic, environmental, and social impact. So you see that there's a thin line between energy efficient procurement, sustainable procurement, public sector procurement, and now what we call the green public procurement. The green public procurement basically takes into consideration environmental aspects of procuring and also looks at the life cycle cost. So all these types of procurement basically considers life cycle cost. The environmental criteria usually is set for purpose of sustainability in the case of green public procurement. So it becomes quite easy when you are procuring items such as cooling devices, which have refrigerants, and then also you can look at the efficiency levels to set a criteria that will match the needed requirements. Now, just for purpose of our presentation, we need to look at the various pillars of procurement, as I mentioned, the green public procurement, economic or sustainable public procurement, and then the social responsible public procurement. These are all policies that can be used. But you also have the tools, like I mentioned, which considers the life cycle cost. And all of these procurement usually will consider life cycle cost. The targets, however, are different. Whereas green public procurement looks at mainly environmental attributes, you have the sustainable public procurement looking at the energy efficiency, which is what we call the energy efficient procurement. And then we have the social aspect as well. In the case of Ghana, what have we done? What are the policies that we have put in place as far as working with energy efficient procurement? Ghana passed its standards and labeling regulations as far back as 2005 with 3 appliances: refrigerators, air conditioners, and lighting devices. And this was passed back in 2005 and 2009 in the case of refrigerators. But we realized that these equipments change with technological advancement. And so there was the need for us to review or revise the regulations to meet up with international best practices and also learn from the achievements that we have been able to make in enforcing these 3 appliances. Fast forward, in 2022, the Energy Commission, through the government of Ghana, passed regulations and expanded the scope of appliances that are going to be regulated. So as we speak now, the regulations covers rice cooker, microwave ovens, water heaters, clothes washing machines, televisions, computers, ventilating fans, industrial fans, comfort fans. And the comfort fans are basically made up of the ceiling fans, the standing fans, the wall fans, and the tabletop fans. We have also revised the refrigerator and air conditioning regulation, as I initially mentioned, to make sure that technological advancements are considered. In 2005, when we passed the first regulation, we did not consider inverter air conditioners. Fast forward, that technology is available. So we needed to revise the air conditioning regulation to make sure that it's taking care of the seasonal form of calculations that will give the inverter air conditioner an advantage. We've also passed standards and labeling efficiency regulations for distribution transformers, electric motors, electric kettles, public lighting, set-top boxes, or what we usually will call the decoders, solar panels, inverters, batteries, and then we have prohibited the manufacture of incandescent filament lamps. So you see that in terms of policy direction, the standards and labeling we have come up with moves away from kitchen to households to even the industry in terms of minimum efficiency standards. Now, why do we set this minimum efficiency standards? It is a way of setting a benchmark to make sure that products that are entering into a market at least meet a certain standard. In sub-Saharan Africa and Ghana in particular, most of the appliances that were imported were basically used, obsolete appliances. But then you also have new products that are coming which are substandard. And the argument has always been that the fact that something is new does not mean it's also durable. And that is the basis why we came up with the MEPS, the minimum energy performance standards, for these products to make sure that they meet the minimum requirement. Now, in terms of assessing all of this, the environmental aspect is there, the social and economic aspect is there. But for the purpose of our discussion, I want to zero in on air conditioners, for example, where we can talk about the environmental aspect and then the energy efficient aspect of what we have done as a country. In the case of air conditioners, I indicated that we have revised the regulation to make provision for the calculation of energy efficiency ratio. And energy efficiency ratio will mean that we are introducing a certain seasonal kind of calculation. And in the case of Ghana, we are using the total cooling seasonal performance factor. Other countries use the cooling seasonal performance factor. You have, and all of this will depend on the various temperatures and the weather conditions. So you need to have a unique situation and set a unique matrix to do the seasonal calculation. So to make it easy for procurement officers, we worked in collaboration with the United Nations UNEP U4E to come up with a customized tool on how to calculate and compare air conditioners that will be prepared for tender evaluation. And so there's a toolkit and a guideline has been prepared. That is one of the critical things to do when it comes to energy efficient procurement. You need to set a benchmark, you need to set a guideline that will guide procurement officers to be able to do that. This toolkit, which is part of the guideline, basically gives a projection. So you are able to put in products, model numbers, efficiency levels, and then the cost, the price. And then this model will now indicate which of these appliances over time, because remember that we are talking about life cycle cost, the total cost of ownership. And so the tool will help you to be able to project what the implications will be in terms of savings over a longer time. Now, we have used this toolkit to engage several trainings. And one of them is to train public procurement officers. So the Energy Commission engaged or collaborated with the Public Procurement Authority in coming up with a guideline and trying to finalize that guideline that will make it binding on procurement officers to be able to use the toolkits and also the guidelines when coming up with evaluation for cooling appliances. So we engaged the high consuming agencies. First of all, we started with Ministry of Health, and then we went to the universities and training colleges to educate them, because these are bulk procurers. They procure in bulk, especially when it comes to cooling appliances, air conditioners. So there was a need to train them, let them understand what the requirements are, let them understand the impact of energy efficient procurement and green public procurement in consideration when they come to evaluation of their tender. Now, in training these people, we had to use some strategies. And what are these strategies? As I mentioned initially, all the type of procurement usually will consider what we call life cycle cost analysis. In procuring, it is always about the initial cost. And initial costs will look at just purchasing costs. However, a lot of procurement officers do not take into consideration the service cost, the maintenance cost, the operational cost, and also possibly the disposal cost when they buy these equipment. So it becomes very difficult, and initially they are looking at a limited budget to buy these products. So what happens? When they meet as an evaluation committee, tender committee, because of the limited budget that they have, everybody is looking at invoices. So you see that the procurement officer or the head of entity will start asking, how much invoice is this company quoting? How much? Not because that is their interest, but also because of limitation of budget. So what we say is that price is very important when it comes to procurement. However, it should not be the only criteria, because when you consider price, you look at what we call the purchasing cost. You do not consider the operational cost and disposal cost, as I mentioned. And in procurement, you need to look at the total cost of ownership. What is the total cost of procuring these appliances, these energy efficient appliances, as we have indicated? So what Energy Commission has done is to train these procurement officers, facility managers, finance officers, auditors, and then also the stores who will be receiving these items, to move away from the lowest price criteria to a new criteria which we call the most economically advantageous tender, aka meats. And you know what it means when you have a lot of meats in your eba or agushi stew, or light soup and all of that. It makes the food quite enticing. So the meat method makes the procurement process and evaluation enticing. And what does it do? The most economically advantageous tender takes into consideration the total cost of ownership and then environmental consideration. And it allows evaluators to set criteria by giving a weighted average. So procurement officers usually would look at price, like I mentioned, and also minimum efficiency levels. But the meat method allows you to set a criteria and weight your scores and allow you to do the evaluation. So for purpose of our discussion, the guidelines that we have come up with, Ghana has come up with and using in the training, takes into consideration energy consumption. And in energy consumption, we talk about the type and the size. So in the case of air conditioning, if you are going to procure, are you looking at just 1 star? Are you looking at 1 horsepower? Are you looking at 12,000 BTU? Are you looking at 2 horsepower? You need to be very clear in your criteria. You need to also talk about the energy efficiency levels you are looking for. In the case of Ghana, we use the star rating, and the star rating works like the hotel system. We say that the more the stars, the more efficient the product is. So what that also means that the higher the star rating, the higher the price. However, you might make some savings on your bills. And I mentioned, just like the hotel system, if I went to a 1-star hotel, I'm sure you agree with me that I will not pay the same amount as somebody who goes to a 5-star hotel. But perhaps in the morning when I wake up, in my 1-star hotel, I'll be given 1 Lipton and 1 boiled egg for breakfast. Whereas the person who goes to the 5-star hotel will end up getting an English breakfast or a buffet. So those are the dynamics that we try to use to the layman to understand the efficiency levels that we have created in terms of star rating. A lot of procurement officers also do not consider the type of technology, which is the compressor type. So in the case of air conditioners, as we are using as a typical example, the air conditioners technology advanced, and so now we have what we call the variable speed, which is the inverter air condition. So as a procurement officer, if you say you want to procure an energy efficient air condition, and yet you don't indicate what your criteria are to the limit of even going to the compressor type, then you can be provided with a fixed speed air condition. And what happens to your criteria? Apart from the energy consumption, we also mentioned the environmental aspect, and that is looking at the refrigerant component. So in the refrigerants, we have the ozone depleting potential, which is the ODP, and then the global warming potential, which is the GWP. Now, these two can be used to set a criteria so that you are careful what kind of refrigerants these air conditions are containing will come into the market. And bear in mind that as a country, Ghana, we are signatories to the Montreal Protocol, and I know a lot of countries are also signatory. So there are commitments to meet in terms of refrigerant phase out and phase down. Now, the green procurement or the energy efficient procurement can help you set a criteria based on the refrigerant category. And we'll look at such an example as we speak. You can also set criteria based on product durability. Okay. In the case of Ghana, for a very long time, warranty does not work. They tell you that goods bought are not returnable. And it's quite unfortunate. But when you use warranty to set a criteria, then it allows you to also have spare parts and then also after sales service requirements. You can also use the environmental sound management, which I mentioned, how to dispose of these equipments, dismantling, take back. In most cases, in public service, people will auction these appliances. Now, the interesting part is that an organization is disposing of these air conditions because they are high consuming and the organization cannot pay for the bills. But you still find staff who feel that this is freebies, and so they want to purchase these things as auction goods and then go and install them in their homes. And the interesting part is that they will be suffering for their bills because they got it cheap initially, virtually free, but these are products that have ended their life and so will consume much more. So again, the size slides will be shared, but for purpose of us understanding how Ghana has used the green procurement and these simple guidelines that we have come up with, I would want to share a template of what I have just explained on how we have been able to use the criteria to educate and train procurement officers. So the MEET method allows you to set a technical, and in our case, energy efficiency levels. So we can set the efficiency level based on star rating, and the MEET method by weighting average says that if you provide us with a 3-star, you get 5 points. If you bring 4-star appliances, you get 15 points. If you bring 5-star, you get 20 points. The maximum criteria we have for energy efficiency, which is star rating, is 20 points. So you see that you are opening the tender to competition, and there will be somehow advantage for the kind of products that are provided. In terms of warranty, you can also weight the scores. We want to give 10 marks for warranty. However, our minimum criteria is 1-year warranty. If you bring us 1 year, you get 2 points, 2 years, 4 points, 3 years, 6 points, 4 years, in that order. So you realize that companies will now be vouching for the efficiency level and the warranty period for their products because they want to be able to win your tender. In addition to the criteria, the MEET method, life cycle cost, as I've mentioned, is very critical. And so that is a key component. And you can see that a score of 40% is allocated to life cycle because the higher the star, the higher the price. But then the life cycle also gives you that discounted calculations that will take into consideration how long the product will be used and then the effect on your bills. And then you see that some advantage can be made here when the person procures an initially high product, but over time, the running cost is cheaper. And the toolkit I initially showed will help you do that calculation. The meat method, again, looks at the environmental performance. So I mentioned the energy efficient aspect and now the environmental performance. How do you set criteria based on environmental performance? In the case of air conditioning, which is our case study, you can use the refrigerant component and say, for example, that if you provide us an air condition with a global warming potential more than 700, then you are going to score 0 points. If you give us an air condition with a global warming potential between 10 and 700, you'll get 10 points. So R410, for example, which is one of the common HFCs, has a global warming potential of 2088, whereas R32 has 675. So comparing these two refrigerants, the person who brings R410, which is more than 700, will be scoring a 0 point under refrigerant component. And then the one who is offering the R32 will be scoring 10 points because R32 falls between 10 to 700. So that is the dynamics, and that is how the meat method allows you to set this criteria. And like I said, we are moving away, and what we have trained procurement officers is to move away from the lowest cost criteria. Now, once you use this method, and the mistake procurement officers usually, they have the concept in their mind, but they don't let it reflect in their report. And we explain to them that when you indicate the method you have used and you do your evaluation and your total mark expected is 100 and a company scores 80, yet his initial cost is expensive, there is no auditor who will come and query you because you have indicated the method you are going to use, which is the meat method. You have taken consideration of efficiency levels. You have taken consideration of life cycle cost analysis. You have taken into consideration the performance of the environmental component of these air conditioners. So this is the toolkit, and this is the guideline that Ghana has used to train procurement officers, facility managers, auditors, finance officers who usually will be doing the payment to understand how energy efficient procurement and green public procurement can be used. Now, what has been the impact of all this training, capacity building, developing the toolkits, and then its impact? It has helped Ghana to reduce its energy intensity across sectors because, like I mentioned, the public institutions are bulk procurers of air conditioners in particular. And studies have shown that air conditioners tend to consume quite a lot in terms of buildings and office spaces. It has also created jobs because obviously, once you have the procurement coming in, energy efficiency will mean that companies will be trying to produce appliances, retail shops will be selling these products, there will be sales personnel who will be available, and that opens the market to more people taking part in it. There's also been cost savings for government. Again, government is a bulk procurer. What it means is that if they use the energy efficient procurement method, they are able to procure appliances that will consume less and so translate into lower payment of bills. And this has actually helped us. It has also contributed in Ghana's climate and energy target because the environmental aspect of the refrigerant, which is lowering the global warming potential, has helped us to be able to mitigate our CO2 emissions. The green procurement and the energy efficiency standards and labeling, the MEPs that Ghana introduced, has helped transform the appliance market in Ghana. And as you can see from the graph here, predominantly Ghana used to be a market of used second-hand products. And in this case, we are looking at refrigerators. Up to 2013 were basically used appliances imported from Europe. But with the introduction of the minimum energy performance standards, the encouragement of energy efficient procurement methods, the market has transformed because there has been demand for these products based on the criteria set. And you can see that from 2013 onwards, the values have changed. The market has transformed from an old, obsolete refrigerator market to now a new appliance market where people are importing new, efficient products. And please remember, I mentioned that the fact that something is new does not mean it's also durable or efficient. And that is why we came up with the minimum performance to make sure that the new ones also coming in meets our minimum energy performance criteria. Now, what has been the challenges for Ghana? In carrying out green public procurement, of course, there are going to be barriers you encounter. You know, the very typical one in the African setting is that, oh, the procurement officer has some 10%. That is why there is an invoice of 5,000, yet he wants to buy a product which is worth 10,000. But it is not always about the price, as we have indicated. It is about the total cost of ownership, the price, the operation, and then the disposal. So you will encounter challenges. You know, there's always perception of high cost. There is always, not taking into consideration the return on the investment, as I've mentioned, as part of our successes. But there are also enablers. And these enablers are using the life cycle costs, coming up with financial incentives that can also help procure these items. Apart from the financial barriers, we also have institutional barriers, and that is usually lack of management support. The procurement officer will intend to use energy efficient procurement in procuring appliances. However, if management do not buy into the idea, then it becomes difficult for such operations to be carried out. There's also that perception that there's low quality. When you are procuring these things, the cheaper it is, that is value for money. But some value for money can turn out to be cost, because you are buying a perceived lower cost item, but not taking into consideration the consumption of those products. The technical barriers that you also encounter are usually finding products that keep on changing because of technology. So in terms of the global warming potential or environment, in the case of air conditioning, R22 used to be the alternative. But over time, R410 became an alternative. And now under the Kigali Amendment of the Montreal Protocol, R410 or HFCs are being phased down. So you realize that technology also comes in as a barrier, because if you procure R410 and now there's a treaty that is phasing out, what happens to your next procurement and what happens to the products that you have procured? Other barriers can also look at information. There's always lack of information and expertise. Like I mentioned, procurement officers will take in consideration costs, but perhaps a lot of them don't know about some of the methods, like the meat method, the most economically advantageous tender I shared, which can help them come up with this. Regulatory and political barriers are also there, and that is basically having institutions who are supposed to enforce these regulations not doing the rightful thing. So all kinds of, and as a procurement person, it becomes difficult for you to find the right product to purchase. The benefits of green public procurement or energy efficient procurement or sustainable public procurement, as I've indicated, looking at various kinds of procurement, includes a lot. And in the case of green public procurement, it takes into consideration the environmental benefits. Politically, there can be benefit, and the political benefit is not about party politics, but also institutions demonstrating what they have done in terms of best practices, to their fellow agencies. And this is one of the political benefits. Ghana is sharing its experience with the world to understand how we have been able to use green public procurement to make some strides. There's also social benefits, economic benefits as well. And in all of this, we are looking at also achieving our SDGs in terms of energy and then also the environmental aspects. Now, one of the major challenges which I would want to share with you is the Ghana label. And I share this because it is important to know that if there is no clear criteria for enforcement, it becomes difficult for procurement to even get their equipment. So even though we promoted green public procurement, we said the more the stars, the more efficient. And you can see on my left or on the left of your screen, the old Ghana label for air condition, and the new one is for the new version of the air condition. Permit me to ask a simple question because I just want to engage my audience a bit. Can anyone just identify any significant difference between the one on the left and the one on the right?
Yes, thank you very much, sir. So I think the total energy consumption of the unit is much more clearer in the one on the right than the one on the left. And then, of course, the stars look more legible also on the right than on the left. There's also a barcode. So I
Great.
guess this is the
So you have
reflected
made my work
the
easier.
bargaining.
Thank you very much. So the two significant ones that we can mention, as he said, is the star rating. You realize that in the old label, we had 1 to 5 stars. In the new label, the star rating has increased up to 7 stars. That means that we are making provision for the newer technologies to be captured under efficiency requirements. However, because we said the more the stars, the more efficient it is, we have found unscrupulous people trying to cheat the system. And so when you look at the label on the left, there is a black star shaded, which is 1. We have found that some people have started using black ink to shade the star ratings, okay? So you shade the black one, shade the second one, and shade the third one to have 3 stars. But they forget that in shading these 3 stars, it must match with the number that is in the black star in the middle. So people try to cheat the system, trying to introduce higher star rating, but it doesn't match the efficiency levels as indicated. And so that is the reason why we introduced the QR code. That is, before the products now come into the market, you need to register with the Energy Commission. And in registering it, we will use the database to generate a QR code that allows the consumer, the procurement officer, to verify the star rating so that they do not end up cheating in submission of products for procurement purposes. The other one is also verification of these products. So Ghana Energy Commission, in collaboration with the Ghana Standards Authority, have collaborated and set up the ultra-modern testing facility for refrigerators and air conditioning to help us verify some of the claims. Because when you use efficient procurement, you now open the market and you cross a demand. Now, people can also fake labels, as I indicated, to be able to meet that demand. So there has to be the need for you to do verification. And in our case, we have a facility that allows us to verify whether indeed these products coming in are what they claim to be. Now, what has been our outlook? What we believe is that in terms of energy efficient procurement, there needs to be a toolkit. And in our case, we have a toolkit that we use. There needs to also be energy auditing activities that can help institutions, because it's one thing buying an efficient product, but the usage is also another thing. And so you can champion buying efficient appliances, but if you don't energy auditing and energy conservation, then you lose the value that comes with it. There's also expansion training. We believe that what we started with the ministries of health, the universities, we are expanding it to other government agencies because they are bulk procurers, and that can also help us save on the bills and government's commitment in paying of bills. There needs also to be that partnership, institutional collaboration, and then also regional leadership. And I'm very happy that ThinkyHearts have given Ghana this opportunity to share what we have done as lessons learned, and then also best practices. And we are also open to receiving comments, learning from other countries. And once we share these kind of regional experiences, it goes a long way to help various countries also adapt same. We have also introduced incentives because initial costs of procuring these items. And to be able to procure it, you need to come up with innovative financial mechanisms. One of them that Ghana has done is to introduce a program called the Eco Fridges. And what the Eco Fridges did was to make sure that salaried workers are able to procure energy efficient cooling appliances at a lower port. And then they have flexibility for payment. So the concept of energy eco fridges is that as a salaried worker, you are able to go to a vendor shop, participating vendor shop, procure a high efficient product, and then the appliance, if it's 5,000 Ghana cedis, is spread over 12 months at 0% interest. And the question now was, how do you get a product at 0% interest? We had to partner with the vendors and the banks to share that profit margin of sales. And what that means is that when you introduce high efficient products, then it's going to be difficult for people to have the initial cost to buy them. And the initial capital has always been the problem. So the banks take care of the initial capital and then consumers are able to pay. This is a simple model that can be used. Unfortunately, in Ghana, and I know in most African countries, we are not credit worthy. People take loans facilities and then they find a way of trying to beat the system or ignore, and it becomes difficult for financial institutions. In Europe and other places where it works, incentives are in place where discounted prices are given, rebate schemes are given, and this is how consumers are able to take advantage to get the most latest or efficient product and then also have flexibility for payment. And Ghana has adapted the eco fridges, which has worked for us. We've been able to sell over 2,000 air conditions, and not just air conditions, high efficient air conditions, over 3,000 high efficient refrigerators in that, and we have been able to make some savings in terms of reduction in energy. Now, I think we have spoken a lot, but the question is, what do we want to go away with? What is the effect of the energy efficient procurement? What we are basically saying is that in the case of Ghana, energy efficient and green public procurement has helped us to transform our market, as I showed in the graph. It has also been able to help facilities set a procurement criteria by using the meat method and follow environmental, economic, and then also saving on their energy bills. I use the air condition example because, like I mentioned, air conditions are high consumers. But then also the refrigerant component, which affects the environment, is causing what we call global warming. But I believe that the globe is not warming, it is actually boiling. And so our initiatives, our actions, one way or the other, affects it. So what does it say? As far as the UNFCCC is concerned, we are looking at a collective action to meet the 1.5 degrees. Green public procurement, energy efficient procurement can help us transform the market and cause a demand that can bring energy efficient products and then also environmentally friendly products into the market. But our inactions will raise the temperature to 2.7 degrees by the year 2100. And I'm sure a lot of us are wondering, 2100, how many years is it from now? That's over 75 years from now. So what does it mean? In 75 years, I don't think I'll be here. I don't know about my audience, if any of you will be here in 75 years' time. So basically, we have an option to make an impact, to create a future for our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, so that when they come into this world in the year 2100, they would say that indeed we had our grandfathers who had an impact to make, and they used methods that were going to help the environment and save our planet. So basically, posterity will be judging. And as champions, as individuals who are championing this in Ghana, this is what we have in mind. that posterity will be judging us on what we do today. And I believe using energy efficient procurement or green public procurement can help us stay at within the 1.5 or not exceed it, and not create a world that lies at 3 degrees Celsius. So with this, I would want to say thank you very much for the audience, and thank you very much for the opportunity to share Ghana's experience.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Hubert. Thank you for such an insightful and engaging presentation. So we're going to quickly move to the Q&A session. If you have any questions, please can you put it in the chat box so I'd read it out for you, and Mr. Hubert can go ahead and answer you. Right, sir, you can go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hubert, for the very great presentation. So, I'm very Nigerian, and it's interesting to be able to learn from our fellow West African countries like Ghana, who are already doing so much with regards to this. My question would be, what happens when you enforce and you take up the inefficient appliances from the market? How do you ensure that they are properly disposed and they do not create any problem? The other question I have to ask is, in terms of the cost of efficient appliances, you've mentioned the programs that you had with eco fridges, but you also mentioned that we are not very credit worthy. So how is Ghana going about that at the moment, so that Nigeria can just learn from that? Thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you very much for the question. So in the case of, and that's an interesting question, I mentioned the issue about institutional collaboration. Now, when you look at the environmental aspect or the disposal aspect, in Ghana, we have an institution called the Environmental Protection Agency, who are mandated to carry end of life of products or e-wastes per se. So what we do is that when these items are seized or for basis of inefficiency, or when they are ending their life and meant to be disposed of, the agency will liaise with the Environmental Protection Agency, who have licensed recycling companies. Now, these recycling companies are not as big as we will see in Europe, where you have huge facilities to do that. But we have companies who are licensed to carry out recycling. So in the case of air conditions, what they do is that they reclaim the refrigerants. Sometimes they recover them, and then after that, the products are left as e-waste. So they take out the metal component, the plastic component, and then they can now sell those components to recoup their investment in properly dismantling them. So this is the approach that we have used. But as I said, it's a little bit crude method. There's a need for these companies to also invest, because electronic waste is actually what is hurting Africa. And so it's a good business model that the Environmental Protection Agency can license more companies who are capable of handling the environmental electronic waste in an environmentally friendly manner. In the case of the credit worthiness, it's rather a shame that that is what we are known for. But I think it happens everywhere, except that we don't let one monkey spoil all monkeys. So what we have done is that the eco fridges that we came up with, which was supposed to give that financial flexibility of payment of these products, actually turned out to be a surprise to us. Even though we made provision that salaried workers can take the facility and pay at 0% interest, which is the price is spread over 12 months, over 90% of the sales under the eco fridges project turned out to be cash. And so what it only told us was that the argument of how many Ghanaians can buy these products was not really the case, but it was actually availability of those products into the market, and also educating them on the benefits that they will get. So, like I said, eco fridges turned out to give us an eye-opener that even though we created a financial incentive to make it flexible, people who appreciated the benefits, the economic benefits in terms of the bills and repayments, ended up paying cash rather for the product than going for the loan facility. So what I would say is that Ecofridges has actually given us the impression that you need to get the product into the market. If there are alternatives of cheap ones and lower price, definitely the argument of price will always come in. But if now the market is transformed, you have efficient products in there, and now education is created on the bills payment and the benefits and how much people can save in their pockets, then it will go a long way to help them, transform. Thank you very much. I hope I addressed the issues.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Hubert, for that. So before we close, I would like to remind everyone here that at ThinkyHearts, we've hosted several related sessions in the past, and the recorded version is on our YouTube channel. If you check the chat box, you see the link to follow us on LinkedIn and subscribe to our YouTube channel. You would also see the link to follow Mr. Hubert on LinkedIn. So we've had sessions like minimum energy performance standards for air conditioners in Nigeria, an introduction to first fuel energy efficiency, ISO 5001 energy management systems, bridging energy management gaps through metering in Nigeria higher institutions, and finally, a facility manager's guide to energy management in the built environment. You can find some of these recordings from these sessions on our Thinky Hearts YouTube channel. Please check them out to continue learning, I guess. So thank you very much, Mr. Hubert, and thank you everyone here for joining this session. You can connect with us on LinkedIn if you have any more questions or you have anything you want to say to Thinky Hearts collaboration. Our email is on the screen, and you can also follow us. We look forward to seeing you at the next Thinky Hearts event. Thank you, Mr. Hubert. Thank you,
Okay.
everyone, for
Thank you
joining. Do
very
have
much
a
for the opportunity, and thank you very much for the contribution and the audience.
all right. Thank you, sir. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.